She thought he was just a handsome, quiet Uber driver, but after he took a shocking, unprofessional call, she discovered he wasn't a driver at all. You know those days when the universe seems to have it out for you? When every single thing that could go wrong does? Well, Harper James was having one of those days, and it was about to get a whole lot more interesting. Picture this, it's raining. Not just any rain, the kind of rain that feels personal, like the sky is angry at you specifically. Those needle-sharp drops that cut through your umbrella, soak through your coat, and somehow find their way inside your shoes no matter how fast you walk. Harper stood under the courthouse archway, and if you saw her in that moment, you'd think she was just another lawyer having a rough day. But this wasn't just rough. This was devastating. She was 28 years old, top litigation associate at one of the most prestigious firms in the city, Daring and Low. The kind of place where your business card opens doors and your last name better be followed by impressive credentials. Harper had worked 60-hour weeks for 3 years to get where she was. 3 years of missed dinners, forgotten birthdays, and relationships that withered because she was always just finishing up this case. And for what? She just walked out of the biggest courtroom disaster of her career. The Meridian Industries case. 8 months of preparation, hundreds of thousands of dollars in billable hours, and a client who trusted her completely. She'd been so confident walking in that morning. Her closing argument was flawless. Her evidence was airtight. Her witnesses were credible. None of it mattered. The jury deliberated for exactly 47 minutes. 47 minutes to destroy everything she'd built. Not guilty on all counts. Those words were still echoing in her head as she stood there, mascara smudged, heels soaked, watching her career potentially circle the drain. Because in a firm like Daring and Low, you don't just lose cases. You win them. That's why they pay you the big bucks. That's why your name goes on the letterhead someday. But Harper had just lost. Spectacularly. The worst part? Vincent Lowe, senior partner, her mentor, the man who'd personally recruited her from law school, hadn't even looked at her after the verdict. She'd seen him in the hallway, surrounded by other partners, their voices low and concerned. When she approached, hoping for what? Comfort? Understanding? A pep talk about how everyone loses sometimes. He'd looked right through her. Like she was invisible. Like she was already gone. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. A text from her assistant, Monica. Next meeting at 3 p.m. Don't be late. Harper glanced at her watch through the rain-spotted screen. 2:23 p.m. 37 minutes to get across town. Pull herself together and pretend like she hadn't just watched her career implode in real time. She needed a ride. Fast. Her fingers were shaking, from the cold, from the adrenaline, from the devastating realization that she might actually get fired, as she opened the Uber app. The little cars on the map seemed to mock her. 3 minutes away. 5 minutes away. 7 minutes away. She didn't have 7 minutes. She barely had 3. The sidewalk was chaos. A jungle of black umbrellas and rushed footsteps. Everyone had somewhere important to be, and nobody cared that Harper's world was falling apart. She stood there, rain soaking through her supposedly waterproof coat, watching every black sedan that passed, willing one of them to be hers. Then she saw it. A sleek black sedan, same make and model as her requested ride, pulling up to the curb about 20 feet away. The license plate was partially obscured by another umbrella, but the timing was perfect. Had to be her driver. Harper didn't hesitate. She couldn't afford to hesitate. She rushed over, yanked open the passenger door, and slid inside, bringing a small waterfall with her. Finally, she muttered, not looking up from her phone as she tried to salvage what was left of her makeup using the camera function. The driver turned around to look at her, and that's when Harper's terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day took its first unexpected turn. He was, well, he was beautiful. Not handsome in that polished, corporate way she was used to. This was different. Raw. Real. Dark hair that looked like he'd run his hands through it. Clean jawline that suggested he took care of himself without being obsessive about it. And his eyes, God, his eyes. They were the kind of eyes that made you forget what you were going to say. Quiet. Thoughtful. Like he was always listening to something the rest of the world couldn't hear. But right now, those beautiful eyes looked confused. Hi, he said, and even his voice was wrong for an Uber driver. Too educated. Too smooth. Like he was used to boardrooms, not back seats. Harper was too stressed to process any of this properly. 36th and older, she snapped. already turning back to her phone. She had emails to answer, damage control to start, a career to somehow salvage in the next 35 minutes. He looked at her in the rearview mirror. You sure? What kind of question was that? Yes, she barked, not looking up. Drive. And here's the thing that should have been Harper's first clue that something was off. He paused, just for a second, like he was making a decision. Then he put the car in drive. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Outside, the rain continued its assault on the windshield. The wipers moved in steady rhythm, swish, swish, swish. And underneath it all, soft jazz played from the car's speakers. The kind of music that was supposed to be relaxing, but somehow made Harper even more tense. She hated jazz. All that improvisation, all those notes that seemed to go nowhere. Give her something with structure, something predictable, something that made sense. Without asking, she reached over and turned it off. In the sudden quiet, she caught something in the rearview mirror. The driver was smiling. Not a customer service smile. A real one. Like he found something genuinely amusing about her rudeness. That should have been her second clue. But Harper was drowning in her own thoughts. The jury foreman's voice kept replaying in her head. Not guilty on all counts. Vincent Lowe's cold shoulder in the hallway. The way the other associates had avoided eye contact when she walked past their offices. She was 28 years old, and she was watching everything she'd worked for slip away. The partnership track she'd been on? Gone. The respect she'd earned? Evaporated. The confidence that had carried her through law school, through the bar exam, through 3 years of 16-hour days? Shattered. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Monica. Partners want to see you before the 3 p.m. Conference room B. Harper's stomach dropped. Conference room B was where they fired people. She stared at the message, and for the first time since the verdict, she felt tears threatening. Real tears. The kind that would ruin what was left of her makeup and prove to everyone that she couldn't handle the pressure. In the driver's seat, the man who wasn't supposed to be there kept driving through the rain, jazzless and quiet, giving this stranger in his back seat exactly what she needed most, space to fall apart. Neither of them spoke, but something was building between them in that silence. Something neither of them understood yet. Harper James thought she was getting a ride across town. She had no idea she was about to get something much more complicated. They were halfway across town when everything changed. The rain had settled into a steady rhythm against the windshield, and Harper had finally stopped checking her phone every 30 seconds. There was something oddly calming about being in motion, about watching the city blur past while someone else handled the driving. For the first time since the verdict, she could almost breathe. Maybe it was the silence. Most Uber drivers felt obligated to fill the space with small talk, asking about her day, commenting on the weather, sharing unsolicited opinions about traffic patterns. But this guy? He just drove. Quiet. Focused. Like he understood that sometimes people needed to exist in their own bubble of misery for a while. Harper found herself studying him in the rearview mirror. The way his fingers drummed silently against the steering wheel. The way he navigated traffic with the kind of smooth confidence that suggested he'd done this route 100 times before. There was something almost meditative about the way he drove. Calm. Controlled. It was oddly attractive. Which was ridiculous, because Harper didn't do attraction with strangers. She barely did attraction with people she knew. Her last relationship had ended 6 months ago when David, a fellow associate at a competing firm, told her she was emotionally unavailable and married to her career. He wasn't wrong, but it still stung. The truth was, Harper had always been better with legal briefs than she was with people. Arguments made sense to her. Evidence was logical. But relationships? Relationships required a kind of vulnerability that made her uncomfortable. You had to let people see you fail. You had to trust them not to use your weaknesses against you. And Harper had just failed spectacularly in front of half the legal community. She was lost in these thoughts when his phone rang. The sound cut through the quiet like a knife. Harper jumped slightly, then felt embarrassed for being so on edge. It was just a phone call. Uber drivers got phone calls all the time, but he didn't answer it immediately. He glanced at the screen, and Harper caught something in his expression, a flash of irritation mixed with resignation. Like he knew exactly who was calling and wasn't particularly excited to deal with them. The phone rang again. He sighed, not loudly, but Harper heard it, and connected the call through the car's Bluetooth system. "Hey," he said, and even that single word carried weight. Not "hello" or "What's up?" or any of the casual greetings you'd expect. Just "hey," delivered in a tone that suggested he was already tired of this conversation before it started. What happened next made Harper wish she'd stayed home with a bottle of wine and her collection of true crime documentaries. A woman's voice exploded through the car's speakers, sharp and accusatory and loud enough to make Harper wince. "So now you don't even text me back?" Harper's eyes widened. Oh God. She was trapped in someone else's relationship drama. This was not what she needed today. She mouthed seriously, to no one in particular, and considered asking him to pull over so she could call another Uber. But the driver, who she was now realizing might have more complicated things going on than just ferrying strangers around the city, kept his voice steady. "You broke up with me yesterday," he said, and there was something almost dangerous in his calm, like he was holding on to his patience by a very thin thread. "I was angry," the woman barked back, and Harper could hear tears underneath the fury. "I didn't mean it. You said I'm boring and emotionally constipated." Harper raised an eyebrow despite herself. Emotionally constipated? That was specific and kind of brutal. She found herself looking at him again, trying to reconcile boring with the man who'd just driven a complete stranger across town without asking questions. The woman on the phone was spiraling now, her voice getting higher and more desperate. "I was hurt. You never talk to me about anything real. You just sit there with that distant look, like you're somewhere else entirely." "Maybe I was," he said quietly. "See? That's exactly what I'm talking about. You're doing it right now." Harper listened to this train wreck unfold with a mixture of fascination and horror. This was someone's real life imploding in real time, and she was an unwilling audience member. The woman kept talking. Something about how he never fought for their relationship, how he just accepted everything with that same maddening calm, how she needed passion and fire and someone who actually cared enough to get angry. And through it all, he just drove. Steady, unflappable, like he was used to being the eye of someone else's hurricane. Harper had heard enough. This woman was clearly the kind of person who thrived on drama, who mistook chaos for passion and manipulation for love. Harper had seen it before. Hell, she'd been guilty of it herself in law school, dating guys who were all intensity and no substance. But this man was trying to extricate himself from toxicity with the kind of grace most people couldn't manage. And this woman was making it as difficult as possible. Before Harper could stop herself, before her rational, professional brain could remind her that this was absolutely none of her business, she leaned forward and spoke directly into the phone's microphone. "He's not boring," she said, loud and clear. "He's actually very intense. In the best way." Dead silence filled the car. Harper couldn't believe she'd just done that. She was a litigation attorney. She was trained to think before she spoke. She'd just inserted herself into a stranger's breakup while sitting in what she thought was his Uber. The driver whipped his head around to stare at her, eyes wide with shock, before quickly turning back to the road. On the phone, the woman's voice came back confused and sharp. "Who? Who is that?" And Harper, apparently having decided to fully commit to this insanity, smirked and doubled down. "You guess," she said. "And you know what? He listens to jazz for fun. Can you even handle that level of depth?" The line went dead. Click. Silence filled the car again, but this time it was different. Charged. Electric. The driver was staring straight ahead, but Harper could see his hands gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. She could see the muscles in his jaw working like he was trying to process what had just happened. Finally, he spoke. "I can't believe you just did that." "I can't believe I just did that either," Harper muttered, suddenly aware that she'd probably just made this poor man's life infinitely more complicated. But then he did something unexpected. He started laughing. Not a polite chuckle or a nervous giggle, but real laughter. The kind that comes from deep in your chest and transforms your whole face. He turned to look at her, just for a second, because he was still driving, and said, "You're insane." Professionally, Harper quipped back and found herself smiling for the first time all day. And that's when she noticed the dimples. Of course he had dimples. Because apparently the universe had decided that Harper's terrible day needed to include being attracted to her Uber driver while simultaneously sabotaging his personal relationships. The atmosphere in the car had shifted completely. What had been awkward silence was now something else entirely. Something that felt dangerously close to chemistry. Harper could feel it crackling between them. Unexpected and unwelcome and absolutely inappropriate given that she was supposed to be a paying customer and he was supposed to be providing a service. But God, when was the last time she'd felt anything like this? When was the last time she'd done something completely impulsive and had it feel right instead of catastrophic? They drove the rest of the way in that charged silence, both of them probably wondering what exactly had just happened and what it meant. Harper found herself stealing glances at him in the mirror, noticing things she hadn't before. The way he navigated through traffic with easy confidence. The way his fingers had resumed that quiet drumming on the steering wheel. The way he kept glancing back at her like he was trying to figure her out. When they finally pulled up to her building, Harper felt an odd reluctance to leave, which was crazy, because she had a career crisis to deal with and a meeting that would probably result in her unemployment. But something about this strange, quiet man made her want to stay in this little bubble they'd created. She reached for her purse to pay, and that's when her entire world shifted again. "What's the fare?" she asked. He turned around in his seat, and that quiet smile was back, the one that had intrigued her from the beginning. "I'm not an Uber driver." Harper froze. "What?" "I just pulled over to answer a text when you jumped in. Figured you were late for something important." Her jaw dropped. "You're joking." "Nope." Of all the things that had gone wrong today, this somehow felt like the most surreal. She'd just spent 20 minutes in a car with a complete stranger. She'd just defended him to his ex-girlfriend. She'd just felt more chemistry with him than she'd felt with anyone in years. And he wasn't even her Uber driver. "Then why the hell did you drive me all the way here?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "You looked like you needed a win." Before she could respond, before she could process the kindness in that simple statement, he reached into his console and pulled out a napkin. He wrote something on it quickly and handed it to her. "In case you ever want a real ride. Thomas." And then, before Harper could say another word, before she could ask his last name or figure out what any of this meant or even properly thank him, he drove away. No app to track him. No rating system to find him again. No way to know if she'd ever see Thomas again. Harper stood on the sidewalk, rain still falling, holding a napkin with a phone number and feeling like her entire world had just tilted off its axis. She'd started the day thinking she'd lost everything that mattered. But maybe, just maybe, she'd found something she didn't even know she was looking for. Harper stood there on the sidewalk, rain-soaked napkin in her hand, watching Thomas's taillights disappear into the gray afternoon traffic. Her mind was reeling, not just from the revelation that he wasn't her Uber driver, but from something else entirely. Something she couldn't quite name, but could definitely feel settling in her chest like a warm stone. "You looked like you needed a win." When was the last time someone had looked at her, really looked at her, and seen what she needed instead of what she could provide? Harper James was used to being the one who delivered wins. For clients, for her firm, for everyone except herself, apparently. She glanced at the napkin again. His handwriting was clean, confident. The kind of penmanship that suggested he took his time with things, that he didn't rush. So different from her own hurried scrawl that came from years of taking notes in depositions and court hearings. Thomas. She'd defended a man named Thomas to his psychotic ex-girlfriend, and she didn't even know his last name. Her phone buzzed. "Monica again, conference room B in 10 minutes. Mr. Lowe is already there." Reality crashed back down on her like a cold wave. Right. Her career was still in shambles. Vincent Lowe was still waiting to deliver what was probably her professional death sentence. And she was standing in the rain obsessing over a stranger who'd been kind to her for 20 minutes. But as Harper hurried into her building, something had shifted inside her. Maybe it was the adrenaline from doing something completely out of character. Maybe it was the lingering effects of that unexpected chemistry. Or maybe it was just the simple fact that someone had been genuinely nice to her on the worst day of her professional life. Whatever it was, Harper walked into that conference room with her shoulders a little straighter than they'd been an hour ago. Vincent Lowe was waiting for her, along with two other senior partners. The conference room felt sterile and cold, all glass and chrome and intimidating leather chairs. This was where careers came to die? "Harper," Vincent said, not looking up from the file in front of him. "Sit." She sat. "The Meridian case," he continued, finally meeting her eyes. 8 months of preparation. Significant resources invested. And we lost. "Yes, sir." "Do you know what that loss cost us? Not just in billable hours, but in reputation?" Harper's throat felt tight. "I understand the implications, Mr. Lowe." "Do you?" He leaned back in his chair, studying her like she was a disappointing stock investment. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you got overconfident. Cocky. You thought you could coast on your law school accolades and that prestigious internship. But this is the real world, Harper. This is where results matter. Each word was designed to cut, and they did. But something strange happened as Vincent Lowe systematically dismantled her confidence. Harper found herself thinking about Thomas. About the way he'd stayed calm when his ex-girlfriend was screaming at him through the phone. About how he'd driven her across town just because she looked like she needed help. We're reassigning you, Vincent continued. Smaller cases. Less responsibility. Consider it a probationary period. It wasn't quite being fired, but it was close. Harper should have been devastated. 6 months ago, she would have been. But sitting there, listening to Vincent Lowe's clinical assessment of her failures, all she could think about was dimples and jazz music and the way Thomas had smiled when she'd turned off his radio without asking. Do you have anything to say? Vincent asked. Harper looked at him, really looked at him, for maybe the first time in 3 years. He was in his late 50s, perfectly groomed, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He'd built his career on intimidation and precision, on making people believe that their worth was directly tied to their billable hours. For 3 years, Harper had believed it too. I understand, she said quietly, and I'll do better. But even as she said the words, she wasn't sure she meant them. The meeting ended with the kind of corporate pleasantries that felt hollow after what had just happened. Harper walked back to her office in a daze, her colleagues avoiding eye contact like failure might be contagious. She sat at her desk and stared at the napkin she'd placed next to her computer. In case you ever want a real ride. Thomas's. What kind of person drives a stranger across town and then disappears without expecting anything in return? What kind of person sees someone having the worst day of their life and decides to make it a little bit better? Harper picked up her phone and dialed the number before she could talk herself out of it. It rang twice before he answered. Hello. Just hearing his voice sent something warm shooting through her chest. Hi, she said. It's Harper. From the car. The crazy woman who hijacked your breakup. She heard him laugh, and the sound made her smile despite everything. Harper, I was wondering if you'd call. I wanted to thank you, she said. For the ride. For being kind when I was, well, when I was having a spectacularly terrible day. How terrible are we talking? Harper found herself telling him everything. About the case, about Vincent Lowe, about feeling like she'd spent 3 years building something that could crumble in 47 minutes of jury deliberation. She told him about the meeting, about being demoted, about the way her colleagues were already treating her like damaged goods. Thomas listened without interrupting, without offering empty reassurances or trying to fix everything. He just listened. That sounds awful, he said when she finished. It was, Harper agreed. But you know what? Sitting in your car, defending you to your insane ex-girlfriend. That was the first time today I felt like myself. Which self is that? The question caught her off guard. I don't know, she admitted. Maybe a version of myself I'd forgotten existed. They talked for another 20 minutes. Easy conversation that flowed like they'd known each other for years instead of hours. Thomas had a way of asking questions that made Harper think, made her examine things from angles she hadn't considered. When she finally hung up, she realized she still didn't know his last name. Didn't know what he did for work, where he lived, or why he'd been driving around downtown in the middle of a workday. But she knew she wanted to see him again. That night, Harper went home to her pristine apartment with its law books and case files and perfectly organized closet full of identical suits. She poured herself a glass of wine and sat on her couch, staring out at the city lights. For 3 years, this had been enough. Work, sleep, repeat. Success measured in billable hours and client satisfaction scores. A life that looked impressive on paper but felt hollow in practice. But something had shifted today. Some fundamental understanding about what she wanted versus what she thought she was supposed to want. Her phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. Hope tomorrow is better than today. Harper smiled and typed back. It already is. She didn't know what was happening between them, but for the first time in months, she was excited to find out. What Harper didn't know was that across town, someone else was having a very different kind of evening. Someone who'd watched Thomas drive away with a strange woman in his passenger seat. Someone who'd made a decision that was about to turn Harper's tentative happiness into something much more complicated. Someone who didn't like losing. and definitely didn't like being humiliated by a stranger on the phone. Harper woke up the next morning feeling something she hadn't experienced in months: optimism. Not the aggressive, achievement-focused optimism that had fueled her career ambitions, but something softer, warmer. Like maybe the world contained possibilities she hadn't considered before. She was humming in the shower, actually humming, when she realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd done that. Law school, maybe? Back when she still believed that success would feel different than it actually did. The morning routine felt lighter somehow. Coffee tasted better. Her reflection in the mirror looked not happy, exactly, but hopeful. Like she was finally breathing properly after holding her breath for 3 years. Harper was thinking about Thomas as she walked to her car. About his voice on the phone last night. The way he'd listened without trying to solve everything. About that moment of unexpected chemistry in his back seat. The way he'd made her feel seen and understood in a way that had nothing to do with her professional accomplishments. She was so lost in these thoughts that she almost missed it. There, tucked under her windshield wiper like a parking ticket, was a folded piece of paper. Harper frowned. Her building had assigned parking. She'd never gotten a ticket here before. She unfolded the paper, and her blood went cold. The message was written in red Sharpie, all capital letters, the kind of handwriting that screamed instability. Stay away from him. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Harper's hands started shaking. She looked around the parking garage, suddenly hyper-aware of every shadow, every sound. The concrete pillars that had never bothered her before now felt ominous. Places where someone could hide. Places where someone could watch. She got in her car and locked the doors immediately, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was insane. She'd talked to Thomas's ex-girlfriend for maybe 2 minutes yesterday. 2 minutes of defending a stranger who'd been kind to her. And now this woman was, what? Following her? Threatening her? Harper drove to work in a state of hypervigilance, checking her rearview mirror constantly, taking a different route than usual just in case. She'd prosecuted enough stalking cases to know how quickly these situations could escalate. How someone's perception of reality could become so distorted that they'd justify increasingly dangerous behavior. But it was just a note, she told herself. Unhinged, yes, but not necessarily dangerous. People wrote crazy things when they were upset. It didn't mean anything was actually going to happen. Harper managed to convince herself of this for exactly 6 hours. She was at her usual coffee shop during lunch break, the little place 3 blocks from her office where she'd been going every day for 2 years, when the barista, Jake, called her over with a concerned expression. Hey, Harper, he said, lowering his voice. You okay? Some woman was here earlier asking about you. Seemed kind of intense. Harper's stomach dropped. What kind of questions? Weird stuff. Like, what time you usually come in, if you always order the same thing, if you ever meet anyone here. She said she was your sister, but… Jake shrugged. I don't know. Something felt off about her. What did she look like? Blonde, maybe 30? Really put together, but her eyes were… Jake paused, searching for the right word. Manic. Like she was running on too much caffeine and not enough sleep. She kept asking for your full name. Wanted to know where you worked. Harper felt the walls of the coffee shop closing in around her. What did you tell her? Nothing, Jake said quickly. I told her I don't give out customer information. But Harper, if she's bothering you, maybe you should call the police or something. She didn't seem stable. Harper thanked Jake and left without ordering her usual latte. She walked back to her office in a daze, constantly looking over her shoulder, jumping every time someone walked too close behind her. This was escalating. Fast. By the time she got home that evening, Harper had made a decision. She needed to talk to Thomas. He needed to know what his ex was doing, and Harper needed to understand exactly what kind of situation she'd stumbled into. She called him from her apartment, double-checking that her door was locked and her curtains were closed. Harper, Thomas said when he answered, and she could hear the smile in his voice. How was your first day in the corporate doghouse? Thomas, she said, not bothering with pleasantries. We need to talk. Your ex-girlfriend left a note on my car this morning. The silence that followed was long and heavy. What kind of note? He asked finally, and all the warmth had drained out of his voice. Harper read him the message, and she heard him curse under his breath. And she was at my coffee shop today, Harper continued, asking the barista about me, about my schedule, my full name, where I work. Jesus Christ, Thomas muttered. Harper, I'm so sorry. I never thought she'd. I mean, she's always been dramatic, but this is stalking, Harper finished. Thomas, I need you to be completely honest with me. Is she dangerous? Another pause. She wasn't, he said carefully. But lately, Harper, there are things about my situation that are complicated. Things I probably should have told you yesterday. What kind of things? Can we meet? He asked. I don't want to have this conversation over the phone. They agreed to meet at a bookstore cafe downtown. Neutral territory, public but not too crowded. Harper spent the entire drive there checking her mirrors, taking random turns, making sure she wasn't being followed. Thomas was already there when she arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee and an expression that was nothing like the easy smile she'd fallen for yesterday. He looked tired, worried, and something else, guilty, maybe. Harper sat down across from him, studying his face. Talk to me. Thomas exhaled slowly, like he was preparing to jump off a cliff. My ex-girlfriend isn't just unstable, he began. She's connected. Her family, they have influence. Political influence. And I used to work for them. Harper felt something cold settle in her stomach. What kind of work? The kind where you ask favors and call in debts, Thomas said carefully. The kind where people's problems disappear quietly and everyone pretends it never happened. He was being deliberately vague, but Harper had prosecuted enough white-collar crime to read between the lines. Political fixers. The people who made phone calls to judges, who buried inconvenient evidence, who turned legal problems into non-problems for the right price. And you walked away from that? Harper asked. I tried to. They don't like it when people walk away. Harper stared at him, pieces clicking into place. So when your ex-girlfriend called you yesterday, when she was screaming about you being distant and emotionally unavailable, she was really screaming about me trying to get out of her family's business, Thomas confirmed. About me wanting a normal life instead of being their guy forever. Harper leaned back in her chair, processing this information. She'd defended a political fixer to his connected ex-girlfriend. She'd inserted herself into a situation involving people who made problems disappear quietly. And now one of those people was following her around town, learning her routines, making threats. Thomas, Harper said quietly, what have I gotten myself into? Before he could answer, Harper's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Cute coffee date. But he's still mine. Back off, or you'll regret it. Harper showed Thomas the screen, and she watched his face go pale. She's here, he said, looking around the cafe with sharp, alert eyes. She's watching us right now. Harper felt her heart start racing again. What do we do? Thomas stood up, his expression hardening into something Harper hadn't seen before. Something that reminded her that he used to work for people who made problems disappear. We leave, he said. Together. And then I tell you everything you need to know to stay safe. As they walked out of the cafe, Harper couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them. That somewhere in the evening crowd, a woman with manic eyes and too much influence was planning her next move. Harper had thought her worst day was losing a case in court. She was beginning to realize that her worst day might still be ahead of her. Harper didn't remember making the decision to go to Thomas's apartment. One minute she was sitting in her car outside the bookstore cafe, hands shaking as she stared at that threatening text message, and the next minute she was driving through the rain-slicked streets toward the address he'd given her. The rational part of her brain, the part that had gotten her through law school and 3 years at a prestigious firm, was screaming warnings. Don't go to a stranger's apartment. Don't get more involved in whatever dangerous situation this is. Call the police. File a report. Handle this through proper channels. But Harper had spent her entire adult life listening to the rational part of her brain, and where had it gotten her? Demoted at work, alone in a sterile apartment, living a life that looked successful on paper but felt empty in practice. For once, she wanted to follow her instincts instead of her training. And her instincts were telling her that Thomas was the only person who could help her understand what she'd stumbled into. More than that, he was the only person she trusted to tell her the truth, even if that truth was ugly. The drive to his apartment took her through a part of the city she rarely visited. Not dangerous, exactly, but grittier than her usual haunts. Older buildings with character instead of glass towers. Small restaurants with neon signs instead of trendy gastropubs. Real life instead of the carefully curated existence she'd built for herself. Thomas lived in a converted brownstone on a tree-lined street that somehow managed to feel both urban and intimate. Harper sat in her car for a moment after parking, looking up at the warm light glowing from his third-floor windows. She could see movement behind the curtains, shadows that suggested he was pacing. He was nervous too. That thought gave her the courage to get out of the car and walk up the front steps. The building had one of those old-fashioned intercom systems, and when she pressed the button for 3B, Thomas's voice came through immediately, like he'd been waiting by the speaker. "Harper, it's me," she said, and her voice sounded smaller than she'd intended. "Come up." Third floor. The door buzzed, and Harper climbed the narrow staircase slowly, her heart pounding with each step. She wasn't sure what she expected. Maybe something sleek and impersonal, the kind of place a political fixer would keep as a safe house. Or maybe something chaotic and unstable, reflecting the drama that seemed to follow him. What she found when he opened the door was neither. Thomas's apartment was warm. That was the first thing that struck her. Not just temperature-wise, though it was a relief after the cold October rain, but genuinely warm. Lived in. The kind of space that felt like someone actually called it home instead of just sleeping there between crises. "You came," he said, and there was relief in his voice that made her chest tighten. "I didn't know where else to go," Harper admitted. He stepped aside to let her in, and she got her first real look at the space. It was surprisingly spacious for a city apartment, with exposed brick walls and hardwood floors that showed their age in the best possible way. There was a record player in the corner. Of course there was, with a collection of vinyl that looked both extensive and well-loved. Books everywhere, not arranged for show, but clearly read and reread. Philosophy, history, some fiction she recognized from college literature classes. A photo of an older man sat on the windowsill, and Harper found herself drawn to it. The resemblance to Thomas was obvious. Same dark hair, same thoughtful eyes, same quiet intensity. "My father," Thomas said, noticing her attention. "He died 3 years ago." "I'm sorry," Harper said, and meant it. There was something in the way Thomas looked at the photo that spoke of genuine loss, not just polite grief. "He was a good man," Thomas continued. "Taught high school history for 30 years. Never made much money, but he was respected. Loved. When he died, I realized I couldn't remember the last time someone had said that about me." Harper turned to look at him, seeing him clearly for maybe the first time. Not the mysterious stranger who'd given her a ride, not the calm voice defending himself against his ex-girlfriend's accusations, but just Thomas. A man who'd lost his father and was trying to figure out how to live a life that would make that father proud. "That's when you decided to leave your old job?" she asked. "That's when I tried to leave," Thomas corrected. "Turns out it's not that simple." He gestured toward the couch, and they sat down, the space between them feeling charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. Harper noticed a wine glass on the coffee table, shattered, like someone had thrown it recently. The pieces had been carefully swept up, but she could see a few tiny shards still glinting in the lamplight. "She was here," Harper said. It wasn't a question. Thomas's jaw tightened. "This morning. Somehow got past the building's security. When I wouldn't let her in, she started throwing things in the hallway until Mrs. Chun from 3A threatened to call the police." Harper felt that cold fear settling in her stomach again. "Thomas, what exactly did you do for her family? What kind of work?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured, like he was choosing each word deliberately. "Political campaigns are expensive," he said, "and messy. Candidates have histories they'd rather not discuss. Opponents dig up information that could be damaging. Sometimes voters ask inconvenient questions. And you made those problems go away." "I was good at it," Thomas admitted. "Too good. I could make a drunk driving arrest disappear from public records. I could ensure that a candidate's ex-wife decided not to talk to reporters. I could convince a whistleblower that staying quiet was in their best interest." Harper felt something twist in her chest. This wasn't just white-collar crime. This was the kind of work that undermined democracy itself. How? Money, usually. Sometimes threats. Very rarely. Things got more physical. The word hung in the air between them like a loaded gun. Harper stared at him, trying to reconcile the man who'd driven her across town out of kindness with someone who'd threatened people for a living. "Did you ever hurt anyone?" she asked quietly. Thomas met her eyes, and she saw something raw and painful there. "I tried to convince myself I was just providing a service, that everyone involved was making choices. But Harper, when you're good at making people's problems disappear, You start to forget that some problems deserve to exist. Before Harper could respond, before she could process what he'd just admitted to her, there was a sound that made them both freeze. Bang, bang, bang. Someone was pounding on the apartment door with the kind of violence that suggested they weren't going to wait for an invitation. Thomas was on his feet instantly, his entire demeanor changing. Gone was the thoughtful, slightly guilty man who'd been confessing his sins. In his place was someone Harper hadn't seen before. Alert, dangerous, ready for trouble. Stay back, he said, moving toward the door. The pounding continued, accompanied now by a voice Harper recognized from yesterday's phone call. But this wasn't the tearful, desperate woman who'd begged Thomas to take her back. This was something else entirely. Something unhinged. Thomas, the voice shrieked. Open the door. We're not done. You don't get to just walk away from me. Thomas looked through the peephole and cursed under his breath. She's not alone, he said to Harper. There are two men with her. Harper's blood went cold. Who are they? Probably her father's people. The kind who don't ask questions when they're told to solve a problem. The pounding got louder, more insistent. Thomas's neighbors were probably calling the police, but Harper knew from her legal work how long it could take for officers to respond to domestic disturbances. Too long. Thomas, the woman screamed again. I know she's in there. That bitch who thinks she can steal what's mine. And then, because apparently Harper's life had become some kind of psychological thriller, the door handle started to turn. She has a key, Thomas said, his voice deadly calm. Harper watched in horror as the door slowly opened, and Thomas's ex-girlfriend stepped into the apartment like she owned it. She was exactly what Harper had pictured, blonde, beautiful, dressed in the kind of expensive clothes that screamed old money and entitlement. But her eyes were wild. Manic. The eyes of someone who'd lost touch with reality and decided that was everyone else's problem. Behind her, two men in dark suits stepped into the apartment. They looked like the kind of people who specialized in making problems disappear, the kind of people Thomas used to work with. Hello, darling, she said to Thomas, her voice sickeningly sweet. Miss me? Thomas positioned himself between the intruders and Harper, and she could see the tension in every line of his body. This was about to get very ugly, very quickly. You need to leave, Claire, Thomas said. All of you. Now. Claire laughed, high and sharp and completely unhinged. Oh, I don't think so. See, Daddy's very upset about our little breakup. He thinks you're having some kind of breakdown, making poor decisions, getting involved with. She looked at Harper with undisguised contempt. Inappropriate people. Harper, Thomas said quietly, not taking his eyes off Claire. There's a fire escape outside the bedroom window. I need you to. She's not going anywhere, Claire interrupted. We're all going to have a nice long talk about boundaries, about loyalty, about what happens to people who forget their place. One of the men stepped forward, and Harper saw Thomas's hands clench into fists. The storm outside had nothing on the one that was about to break inside Thomas's apartment. What happened next unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance between people who'd done this before. Thomas moved first, not toward the men, but toward Harper, grabbing her hand and pulling her behind the kitchen island. It wasn't much cover, but it was something. The apartment that had felt so warm and welcoming minutes ago now felt like a trap. Claire, Thomas said, his voice carrying an authority Harper hadn't heard before. This wasn't the gentle man who'd confessed his sins or the kind stranger who'd given her a ride. This was someone who'd learned to project power in rooms full of dangerous people. You have 30 seconds to walk out of here before this gets ugly. Claire laughed, that same high, sharp sound that made Harper's skin crawl. Oh, Thomas, you always were dramatic. Daddy just wants to talk. Daddy sent muscle to a domestic dispute, Thomas replied. That's not talking. That's intimidation. One of the men, the larger one, with hands that looked like they'd broken things before, took a step forward. Mr. Carver wants to see you, he said, his voice flat and professional. Both of you. Harper felt something cold shoot through her veins. Carver. She knew that name. Every lawyer in the city knew that name. Richard Carver, real estate mogul, political kingmaker, the kind of man who owned judges and senators like other people owned stock portfolios. Thomas's ex-girlfriend was Claire Carver, daughter of one of the most powerful men in the state. And Harper had humiliated her on the phone yesterday in front of the man she was obsessed with. Harper, Thomas said quietly, when I say run, you run. Fire escape. Don't look back. But before anyone could move, Claire stepped forward, and Harper got her first good look at the woman who'd been terrorizing her for the past 24 hours. Claire Carver was beautiful the way a knife was beautiful, all sharp edges and gleaming surfaces designed to cut. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled despite the rain, her makeup flawless despite the obvious emotional breakdown. She was wearing the kind of dress that cost more than Harper's monthly rent, paired with heels that could double as weapons. But it was her eyes that truly frightened Harper. They weren't just angry or hurt, or even crazy. They were empty. Like she'd convinced herself that other people weren't quite real, weren't quite as important as her feelings and her wants and her needs. You, Claire said, pointing at Harper with one perfectly manicured finger. You think you're so clever, don't you? Swooping in to save the day with your little quips and your legal training. Harper found her voice, though it shook slightly. I don't know what you think I did, but you humiliated me, Claire snapped. On the phone, in front of him, making me look like some pathetic, desperate woman. You were being pathetic and desperate, Harper shot back, her lawyer instincts kicking in despite her fear. You broke up with him and then stalked him when he didn't come crawling back. The slap came fast and hard, snapping Harper's head to the side and bringing tears to her eyes. She tasted blood where her teeth had cut her lip. Thomas exploded into motion. Harper had never seen violence like that up close. Not the sanitized version from movies or the clinical descriptions from police reports, but real, raw, brutal violence between people who knew exactly how to hurt each other. Thomas hit the first man before anyone could react, a vicious uppercut that dropped the guy like a stone. The second man was bigger, stronger, but Thomas fought like someone who'd learned violence as a survival skill rather than a sport. Efficient, ruthless, scary. Claire was screaming, but Harper couldn't make out the words over the sound of furniture breaking and fists connecting with flesh. The warm, cozy apartment became a war zone in seconds. Run, Thomas shouted to Harper as he grappled with the second man. Now, but Harper couldn't run. Not because she was frozen with fear, though she was terrified, but because she realized something that cut through the chaos like a blade. She didn't want to run from Thomas. She wanted to run with him. Together, she yelled back. We go together. Thomas looked at her for just a second, and something passed between them. Understanding. Trust. The beginning of something that felt bigger than attraction or chemistry or even love. Partnership. Thomas grabbed a lamp and brought it down on the second man's head, dropping him next to his unconscious partner. Claire was backing toward the door, her perfect composure finally cracking as she realized her father's muscle hadn't been enough. This isn't over, she snarled. You have no idea what you've done. What he's done. He betrayed my family, and now you're helping him. Your family, Thomas said, breathing hard but keeping his voice steady, is a criminal organization that hides behind political donations and charity galas. I'm done being your father's pet fixer. You're done when Daddy says you're done, Claire shot back. And after tonight, after this. She gestured at her unconscious security team. You'll never be done. That's when Harper stepped forward. Maybe it was adrenaline. Maybe it was 3 years of courtroom experience. Maybe it was just being tired of watching other people control her life. Actually, she said, her voice carrying the kind of authority she'd learned to project in front of hostile juries, he is done. Because I've been recording this entire conversation on my phone. It was a lie. Her phone was in her purse, and she'd been too terrified to think about evidence collection. But Claire didn't know that. Your father's men just committed breaking and entering, assault, and criminal intimidation, Harper continued. That's all on tape. Along with your confession about your family's criminal activities and your explicit threats against both of us. Claire's face went white. You're bluffing. Harper smiled. The same smile she'd worn when she was about to destroy a hostile witness. Try me. I'm a litigation attorney, sweetheart. Evidence is what I do. For the first time since she'd walked into the apartment, Claire looked uncertain. Afraid, even. Thomas, Harper said, not taking her eyes off Claire. I think it's time we called the police. And maybe the FBI. I'm sure they'd be very interested in hearing about the Carver family's political activities. Thomas stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Not the woman who'd needed rescuing. Not the stranger he'd been kind to. But Harper James. The woman who'd built her career on being smarter and tougher than the opposition. You can't, Claire whispered. You don't understand what they'll do to you. What they'll try to do, Harper corrected. But here's the thing about bullies, Claire. They're only scary until someone stands up to them. Claire looked between them. Thomas, who'd just proven he could handle her father's muscle, and Harper, who'd just proven she could handle legal warfare. And something seemed to break inside her. "You deserve each other," she said. And for the first time, she sounded more hurt than angry. "You're both going to destroy everything you touch." She stepped over her unconscious security team and walked toward the door, her perfect composure finally cracking completely. "This isn't over," she said again. But this time it sounded more like a prayer than a threat. The door slammed behind her, leaving Thomas and Harper alone with two unconscious men and the wreckage of what had been a peaceful evening. They stood there for a moment, breathing hard, adrenaline still coursing through their systems. Then Thomas looked at Harper, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. "You didn't record anything," he said. Harper grinned. "Nope. Complete bluff. That was incredibly stupid. Probably. And absolutely brilliant. Definitely." And then, because apparently surviving a home invasion together had a way of cutting through normal social conventions, Thomas crossed the room in 3 quick steps and kissed her. Not a gentle, tentative first kiss, but the kind of kiss that happened when two people realized they'd found something worth fighting for. Harper kissed him back with 3 years' worth of pent-up passion, with the relief of someone who'd finally found a person worth risking everything for. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "We need to call the police," he said. "We need to disappear," Harper replied. "Tonight, before Claire regroups and comes back with more people." Thomas nodded. "I know a place. Somewhere safe while we figure out our next move." "Our next move?" Harper asked. Thomas smiled, the same quiet smile that had intrigued her from the beginning. But now it was full of promise and possibility and something that looked a lot like love. "I'm done running from the Carvers," he said. "But I'm not done running with you." Harper looked around the destroyed apartment, at the unconscious men on the floor, at the shattered remains of Thomas's carefully ordered life. 6 months ago, this would have terrified her. The mess, the danger, the complete uncertainty of what came next. Now it felt like the beginning of the only adventure that had ever mattered. "Let's go," she said. They grabbed what they could carry, Thomas's go bag from the closet, Harper's purse, the photo of his father from the windowsill, and walked out into the rain together. For the first time in her adult life, Harper had no idea what came next. And for the first time in years, Thomas wasn't running away from something. They were running toward whatever they could build together.